Hello once again. The two characters that I've talked about over the past 2 days as influences from my past were what we might describe as fairly conventional people. The person I want to recall today was rather less so. His name was Arthur Atwood. He came from a tough East End background, and by all accounts he'd lived a fairly colourful life as a young man: wine, women, song and so on. Apparently, during the 1930s, he'd also dabbled in the fascist rallies that took place in London. Unfortunately, as a young man, he'd been involved in a motorcycle accident, as a result of which he'd lost an arm. But he received some financial compensation, which he shrewdly invested in property as one of the early buy-to-let landlords, which nicely supplemented what he earned from his day job. His trade was as a French polisher. Despite being left with only one arm, he had adapted well to his disability, and he got regular polishing work with the many furniture and cabinet making businesses which were dotted around North and East London in those days. I'd see him from time to time coming back from work with his white tradesman's overalls streaked with French polish stains, and carrying a large wooden case which contained all the tools of his trade. Among his early interests had been going to the dogs. That expression, of course, has come to mean now going downhill or falling into rack and ruin. But its origin, naturally, is in greyhound racing. Greyhound racing used to be a very popular source of East London entertainment and gambling in the last century, and there were several stadiums within easy reach from where Arthur lived. One afternoon or early evening, he was on his way to enjoy himself at the Walthamstow Stadium, which was one of the biggest in the country. And he happened to walk past a small chapel which was holding an evangelistic campaign. There was a steward standing outside inviting passers-by to go in. And Arthur, with time to kill and curious, did just that. He heard the gospel preached, and it spoke to his situation. He committed himself to the Lord, and his way of life and outlook were totally changed. At our church, the weekly communion service was followed by a short period where members of the congregation were free to stand up and give a word. Arthur was an occasional contributor. More often than not, he would speak on Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 18. Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armour of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Being a simple working man, Arthur was not the most eloquent with words. From time to time, the whole armour of God came out as the old armour of God. Perhaps he was speaking more truth than he knew at that moment. God's armour is old in the sense that it is tried and tested. It has stood the test of time. Well, whatever, the words meant a great deal to Arthur and were spoken with great sincerity. They were his testimony to a personal experience of the Lord's saving and sustaining work in his life. Although he was comfortable enough financially, life was still tough for him. He had his ongoing disability to contend with. He never married, and so he had to keep house, cook and look after himself, as well as getting out and about around London on public transport in order to earn a living. It's sometimes pointed out that the armour of God that Paul describes in Ephesians chapter 6 is largely made up of defensive equipment. It's not primarily for aggression. The only offensive piece of argument is the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Mention of the word speaks of proclamation. What we say and how we live are meant to be an advertisement, a proclamation for our faith. And Arthur, with his changed way of life following his conversion and his readiness to declare his faith to others, was certainly prepared to take up his sword. So, whenever I hear Ephesians 6 read or preached, he instantly comes into my mind. An unlikely character, certainly. Like him, shows that the armour of God is not just a clever illustration and word spinning, but it's a practical demonstration of the strength which is available to us all as we contend with all that life throws at us. May that be our experience too. Amen.